A tiny knight battles a snail in a sacred book's margin. This odd sketch is a piece of a hidden language called Marginalia, the doodles and jokes scribbled by medieval scribes. By the end of this, you will know how to read these secret messages from the past. We will uncover why a bored monk would draw such a thing, and how these playful marks were a quiet act of rebellion. What does your own boredom create when no one is watching hour after hour? The only movement was the slow drag of a quill across treated animal skin. A scribe's world was one of disciplined silence, a room so quiet he could hear the rustle of his own robes and the steady, maddening scratch of his own pen. His primary duty was sacred, to copy the words of scripture and ancient learning without a single error. Each letter had to be perfectly formed, a mirror of the text before him. This was not just a job, it was a form of prayer, yet the human mind is not built for such unbroken focus. In that endless quiet, amid the repetition of his holy task, a different kind of thought would begin to whisper. A flicker of rebellion would stir in his wrist. His hand, trained for perfect curves and straight lines, might suddenly sketch the face of a grumpy bishop in the margin. Or a long-legged rabbit, or that baffling snail charging a knight. This was not disrespect, it was survival. These tiny drawings were a pressure valve for a mind pushed to its limits, a silent scream against the monotony that surrounded him. The very perfection of the page demanded an imperfection, a secret signature of the man behind the manuscript. So what exactly were these secret margins filled with whispers? The formal term is marginalia, a word rooted in Latin meaning belonging to the margin. In the world of a medieval book, it is the catch-all name for everything that was not the official text. It is the writing, the drawing, and the markings that fill the empty borders of the page. Think of a modern textbook where a student might jot down a question in the corner or draw a little star to mark an important passage. Now amplify that 1,000-fold. Medieval marginalia includes everything from serious scholarly notes called glosses that explain a difficult Latin word to tiny pointing hands known as manicules that say, "Look here." It even includes strange musical notes sketched for no apparent reason. But our journey is into a specific, wondrous category. We are hunting the purely personal, the whimsical, the absurd doodles that serve no official purpose. These are the margins that talk. They are the unofficial commentary, a quiet but persistent voice that runs alongside the solemn text. A perfectly copied psalm about devotion might share a page with a monkey playing the bagpipes. A dense philosophical argument could be bordered by a knight falling off his horse. This is the intimate layer, the one that transforms a holy book from a mere object of doctrine into a living artifact. One that contains a conversation between the timeless word and the very tired, very human man copying it. By separating these intimate scribbles from the formal annotations, we can begin to sort them, to understand the different languages this secret art spoke. That simple act of doodling during a long lecture, tracing shapes in the corner of your notes, is a direct link across 1,000 years. You were performing the same mental ritual as a medieval scribe, a ritual of cognitive maintenance. For him, the stakes of his primary task were monumental. The cost of a single error could mean days of painstaking correction or the ruin of precious materials. Experts in how our minds work suggest that such spontaneous drawing isn't a sign of a wandering attention, but a tool to anchor it. By giving his hand a brief, creative task, the scribe was preventing his mind from drifting away completely. The intricate geometric pattern he sketched, the sudden appearance of a dragon's tail curling around a capital letter, these were not meaningless scribbles. They were a pressure release valve for a brain strained by relentless focus. The repetition of forming perfect letter after perfect letter could lull the mind into a trance, and the doodle was a sharp, creative jolt, a mental reset that allowed him to return to his sacred text with renewed clarity. This reframes every whimsical sketch we find. It was not a sign of disrespect, but a testament to a profound dedication to the work itself, a necessary tool for achieving the focus such a monumental task demanded. And this fundamental understanding of the doodle as a tool for focus naturally leads us to its more complex and deliberate cousin, the riddle. But that creative spark could sharpen into something far more deliberate. A scribe might pause, his quill hovering not to sketch a dragon, but to compose a puzzle in the margins of a psalm. Riddles were the intellectual currency of the medieval world, a form of mental gymnastics as popular in the monastery as in the mead hall. These were not simple children's games. They were intricate linguistic traps woven from allegory and metaphor, designed to test the wit of any future reader who dared to engage. One of the most famous collections, the Exeter Book, is a treasure chest of these Anglo-Saxon enigmas. Its pages are filled with riddles that describe common objects in the most elusive terms. One riddle speaks of a creature with one eye and 1,000 backs, a strange being that travels in a straight line yet carries its own road on its back. The answer, a needle and thread. Another describes a wonderful thing hanging by a man's thigh, a hole in its front. It is stiff and hard, it has a good place. When the man lifts his own garment over his knee, he wishes to visit that familiar hole. The innocent answer is a key. These riddles showcase a playful, almost cunning mind, using double meanings and vivid imagery to conceal and reveal the mundane. When a scribe copied or invented such a riddle in the margin, he was doing more than just passing time. He was initiating a secret handshake with an unknown future colleague. He was laying down a challenge, inviting a reader a century later into a shared game of intellect. Solving it required more than just knowledge. It demanded a particular way of seeing the world, an understanding that a simple key could also be a sly joke. This transformed the static manuscript into something interactive, a conversation stretched across generations. It was a testament to the scribe's own education and cleverness, a way to prove that his mind was alive with more than just rote transcription. And sometimes that sharp, playful intellect would turn its gaze from objects to people, escalating from clever wordplay into outright satire. The most audacious of these scribble jokes turned the world completely upside down. We find, sketched with careful irreverence, a world where rabbits are the hunters, sounding their horns as they chase terrified knights. We see foxes dressed as bishops, preaching to a congregation of gullible chickens. A nobleman, meant to be the picture of dignity, is shown tumbling headfirst into a river. To our modern eyes, these scenes can seem simply bizarre, a gallery of medieval weirdness. But their intent was sharp and unmistakable. This was satire, a highly sophisticated form of social commentary disguised as harmless folly. In a society defined by rigid hierarchies, where a scribe was near the bottom, the blank margin of the page became a unique and powerful space. It functioned as a kind of sanctioned carnival ground, a temporary zone where the normal rules of power and propriety were suspended. Here, the lowly could mock the mighty, and the powerful could be made to look foolish, all under the protective cover of a joke. A bishop meticulously copied in the main text might share his page with a doodle of a man with a donkey's head, wearing a bishop's mitre. This was not random absurdity. It was a quiet, calculated critique. It was the scribe's way of talking back to the authority figures who governed his life, a means of expressing the everyday frustrations and petty injustices he could never voice aloud. The joke was his pressure valve. By framing his dissent as a whimsical drawing, he could say the unsayable. The very absurdity of the image provided plausible deniability. Who could punish a man for drawing a silly rabbit? The humor was a shield, allowing the scribe to engage in a subtle form of rebellion without risking direct confrontation. This reveals a critical layer of meaning in these manuscripts. They are not just repositories of faith and knowledge, but also records of quiet dissent, proving that even in the most controlled environments, the human spirit finds a way to question and to mock. So how did they manage to get away with such boldness right under the noses of their superiors, the very people they were subtly mocking? Yet the question remains, how did they dare to put ink to such dangerous thoughts? Censorship was an ever-present reality, a watchful eye that could condemn a work or punish its creator. The margins offered a unique loophole, a space of plausible deniability that the scribes exploited with brilliant cunning. A fox in a bishop's robe preaching to a flock of geese could always be dismissed as a simple beast fable, a common moral tale. But to anyone who had witnessed a corrupt priest delivering a hollow sermon to his gullible parishioners, the meaning was crystal clear. The location of the joke was its first layer of defense. Positioned at the very edge of the page, this art was considered unofficial, peripheral, and beneath the notice of a serious censor reviewing the sacred text. A superior flipping through the book to check the quality of the Latin might easily overlook a tiny, grinning hair, dismissing it as the meaningless scratch of a bored craftsman. This was the scribe's calculated risk, and his genius lay in the code. By using animals, monsters, and established allegorical figures, he created a shared language for the in-group, a visual shorthand that those in the know would understand instantly. A rabbit triumphantly blowing a hunting horn was not just a funny animal, it was the underdog winning for once. A donkey playing a harp was not mere fantasy, it was a pointed comment on someone's lack of skill or refinement. This symbolic system allowed for sharp critiques of social hierarchy, clerical hypocrisy, and political power, all while maintaining a veneer of harmless nonsense. The scribe became a master of implication, a weaver of hidden meanings who walked a razor's edge between expression and obedience. This delicate dance was not just an act of rebellion, it was a demonstration of profound intellectual courage. Their methods of evasion were as creative and intricate as the doodles themselves, proving that the quietest marks can sometimes speak the loudest truths. Step into the menagerie of the margin, a riotous parade of creatures both real and imagined. These were not mere flights of fancy, but a symbolic language drawn from the bestiaries, the popular encyclopedias of animals that assigned a moral lesson to every living thing. A lion, depicted as sleeping with its eyes open, symbolized the eternal vigilance of Christ. A pelican, shown pecking its own breast to feed its young with its blood, represented the ultimate sacrifice. The margins teemed with these living symbols. You would find the griffin, guardian of divine power, and the dragon, the embodiment of sin and chaos. But one creature appears with baffling frequency, the humble snail, often locked in combat with a fully armored knight. Why would a scribe draw this lopsided duel over and over? Was the snail a stand-in for the Lombard people, mocked for their cowardice? Was it a joke about the futility of fighting an enemy who simply retreats into its shell? Or was it simply a visual pun, the ultimate underdog story that never failed to get a chuckle? The true meaning remains one of the great unsolved puzzles of medieval art. These beasts served a triple purpose. They could underscore a moral point from the main text, acting as a visual sermon. They could represent a human vice like greed or a virtue like patience. And sometimes they simply satisfied a deep human fascination with the exotic and the monstrous. This vibrant, parallel world of creatures reveals a society utterly captivated by the boundaries of the known world, a place where maps were filled with sea serpents and the edges of the page could hold any wonder. To truly read these margins, we must learn to speak this rich, non-verbal language where every animal carries a hidden message. But to truly hear what these margins are saying, we must become fluent in their secret symbolic language. A rabbit is rarely just a rabbit. In the medieval mind, it could be a symbol of lust for its perceived promiscuity or of cowardice for its tendency to flee. A loyal dog resting at a saint's feet often represents fidelity, while a pelican, in an act of moving self-sacrifice, was shown feeding its young with its own blood, becoming a powerful symbol for Christ's sacrifice on the cross. Even the intricate patterns that curl through the margins are speaking. Those endless vines and complex knots woven through the text were not just decorative filler. They were visual metaphors for eternity, for the interconnectedness of all creation, or for the complex, winding path to salvation. Then there are the babewins, those bizarre and grotesque hybrid creatures, part human, part beast, often caught in ridiculous or chaotic situations. The straightforward interpretation is that they represent sin and chaos, a warning to the reader not to stray from the righteous path laid out by the holy text. But their sheer inventiveness and frequent humor complicate that reading. Why would a scribe take such evident delight in drawing the very sin he was supposed to be warning against? This is the central puzzle of decoding this art. It requires us to shed our modern, literal way of seeing and to think like a medieval person for whom the entire world was an allegory, a book written by God where every creature and plant held a hidden moral lesson. Each manuscript becomes a picture puzzle where every doodle is a deliberate piece, and the entire page is the complete image. Learning this symbolic language unlocks a second, deeper narrative running in parallel to the main text, a story told in whispers of ink. This complex visual system allowed for layered storytelling without a single written word, a silent dialogue between the scribe and the initiated reader. So who were these individuals who left such a personal, coded legacy behind for us to discover centuries later? For centuries, these scribes were anonymous, their personalities lost to history. But through their marginalia, we can begin to reconstruct them. Was the scribe who filled a border with delicate, precise flowers a patient and contemplative individual? Was the one who drew a scowling face next to a difficult passage expressing frustration? By analyzing the style, frequency, and content of marginalia, paleographers, who are scholars of ancient writing, can sometimes identify the hand of a specific scribe across multiple manuscripts. It is like recognizing a friend's handwriting on a postcard, a unique signature of pressure and flair that becomes unmistakable over time. In rare and wonderful cases, a scribe might even leave his name, not in the formal colophon at the end of the book, but hidden within a doodle itself, tucked into the curls of a dragon's tail or written on the shield of a tiny knight. These personal touches are incredibly valuable. They remind us that history was made by individuals with senses of humor, bad days, and creative impulses just like our own. A page filled with frantic, agitated sketches might tell the story of a particularly long and cold night in the scriptorium. A carefully rendered, beautiful marginal scene could signal a moment of peace and satisfaction. These marks transform the scribe from a mere copyist into a co-author, an interpreter, and a commentator. He was not just replicating words, he was actively engaging with them, leaving his own emotional and intellectual fingerprints on the page. Recovering these personalities makes the medieval world feel immediate and human. no longer a distant period of stone and scripture, but a time populated by people we can recognize. Recognizing the individual behind the quill deepens our connection to the past in a profound way, because their personal struggles, their joys, and their need to create are so often vividly reflected in their work. The most direct voice we hear from the past is a simple complaint about the cold. A scribe, his fingers stiff and aching in a damp stone room, might pause his copying to scrawl a few words in the margin, not about God or philosophy, but about the miserable chill. These are not symbolic doodles or coded riddles, but raw, unfiltered asides that document the daily grind of creating a book by hand. One Welsh scribe, after finishing a particularly long section, wrote a message that anyone who has ever finished a difficult task can understand. He penned, "Now I have written the whole thing, for Christ's sake give me a drink." It is a joke, a plea, and a sigh of exhaustion all at once. Another lamented the very material he worked on, scribbling, "The parchment is hairy," a frustrated note about a cheap piece of animal skin that was difficult to write on smoothly. These candid comments are priceless windows into the workshop. They reveal the mundane, often unpleasant realities behind these magnificent objects, the human cost of their creation. This raw honesty forges a powerful sense of camaraderie across the centuries. When you read that plea for a drink, you are not just learning about history, you are sharing a moment of weariness with another person. The manuscript transforms from a static relic into a collaborative effort, a shared experience between the writer and any future reader who happens upon his note. This is the margin talking in its clearest, most human voice, and sometimes when simple words were not enough to convey the depth of their frustration, that feeling was channeled into a more elaborate, artistic form of protest. Hundreds of armored knights, immortalized in ink, eternally raise their lances against an enemy that is neither a dragon nor a foreign invader, but a common garden snail. This bizarre duel is one of the most persistent visual jokes in the entire medieval world, appearing in the margins of prayer books and legal texts from England to Italy. For modern scholars, this snail is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside a shell. Early interpretations reached for serious, symbolic meaning. Was it a depiction of social struggle, with the lowly snail representing the downtrodden masses slowly, inexorably resisting the armored might of the aristocracy? Or was it a specific ethnic slur, a caricature of the Lombard people, who were frequently accused of cowardice in medieval chronicles? There is even a compelling religious reading where the knight becomes Christ, triumphantly battling the snail as a symbol of death, which is forced to emerge from its tomb-like shell. Yet the overwhelming feeling one gets from these images is not piety or protest, but pure, unadulterated absurdity. The snail is often depicted as colossal, almost as large as the horse, its face set in a determined glare. The knight, in contrast, sometimes looks genuinely alarmed, even fearful. This sheer ridiculousness points to another possibility, that it was simply a visual gag that never failed to get a laugh in the scriptorium. It might have been a pun, playing on the similarity between the Old French word for snail, escargot, and the command escargot, meaning to go away. Or perhaps it was a timeless joke about the futility of certain battles, a commentary on fights that are as slow, frustrating, and ultimately unwinnable as trying to vanquish a mollusk. The true power of the knight and snail motif lies in its refusal to be pinned down to a single meaning. A devout reader could see a lesson about humility or resurrection. A frustrated peasant might see a subversive fantasy of the weak triumphing over the strong, and a tired scribe, after hours of painstaking work, might just see a funny picture that broke the monotony. This ambiguity was the image's greatest strength. It was a vessel into which anyone could pour their own interpretation, a single drawing that could be pious, political, and profoundly silly all at the same time. The snail's enduring mystery is a perfect lesson in the challenge of decoding this entire art form, reminding us that the quietest marks in the margin can sometimes hold the loudest, most complex conversations. An ornate book of law held more than just statutes and precedents. Its margins could contain the scowling face of a corrupt official, sketched by a clerk who knew his dealings all too well. The impulse to leave a mark was not confined to the monastery's silent halls. It spilled out into the world of secular manuscripts carried by lawyers, students, and aristocrats in their own libraries. These books, covering everything from poetry and romance to medicine and law, became new canvases for the same human need to talk back, to connect, and to personalize. The context, however, completely reshaped the conversation. Instead of spiritual allegories about lions and pelicans, the margins of a secular text often held sharp social observation. A copy of a popular romance might feature a reader's quick sketch of the hero, Lancelot, capturing a moment of drama that particularly resonated with them. This was Marginalia as fandom, a deeply personal engagement with a story. In a medical textbook, a carefully drawn diagram of a plant or a surgical instrument in the margin served a dual purpose. It was both a memory aid and a practical clarification, blurring the line between idle doodle and essential annotation. This shift from the sacred to the everyday proves that the desire to annotate was a universal human trait. It was a fundamental part of how people interacted with the written word, a process of making a text, any text, truly their own. The techniques these artists used were as diverse as their subjects. Some drawings were quick, rough outlines, dashed off in a moment of distraction. Others were meticulously rendered in rich inks and even highlighted with gold leaf, showing that a wealthy patron valued these whimsical additions as much as the text itself. This expansion into secular life reveals Marginalia not as a quirky monastic habit, but as a pervasive cultural practice, a thread of personal expression woven through the very fabric of medieval literacy. The very ink used to sketch a grinning rabbit held its own story of transformation and alchemy. A scribe's primary tool was iron gall ink, a potent brew created from oak galls, those abnormal growths formed on tree branches by wasp larvae mixed with iron salts. This produced a fluid that went onto the page, a pale, bluish-black, but deepened over time into a rich, permanent black, etching the scribe's work, both sacred and subversive, into the parchment for eternity. When color entered the margins, the investment became far greater. That vibrant red came from vermilion, a pigment derived from the toxic mineral cinnabar. A brilliant blue might be ultramarine, painstakingly ground from precious lapis lazuli stones imported from distant Afghanistan, making it more expensive than gold. A scribe dipping his brush into such a pigment was handling a small fortune. The decision to use these costly materials on a marginal scene of a fox preaching or a knight jousting with a snail is profoundly telling. It was not a furtive act of boredom, but a deliberate allocation of time and treasure. This suggests that within many workshops, these whimsical additions were not just tolerated, but actively valued. They were seen as essential to the book's overall beauty and intellectual character, a sanctioned part of the visual landscape. Look closely at the line work in these drawings. The confident stroke defining a creature's fur, the delicate wash of color filling a gown, the intricate patterns on a tiny shield, all of it reveals a hand trained in the arts of illumination. This was not the hasty scrawl of a distracted novice, but the considered execution of a skilled craftsman. The materials themselves, from the common iron gall to the lavish lapis lazuli, whisper a crucial truth about these margins. They were not an afterthought, they were art. This meticulous artistic effort, visible in the vibrant pages of so many manuscripts, connects directly to the great cultural reawakening that was already stirring across Europe. The same artistic spirit that carved a grinning gargoyle onto a soaring cathedral also filled the margins of a prayer book with playful monsters. This was the world of Gothic art, a time when the peak of elaborate marginalia created a breathtaking harmony between chaos and order. Look at a page from a 13th or 14th century Gothic manuscript, and you see two worlds coexisting. The central text block is a fortress of divine reason, its letters marching in perfectly straight, geometric lines. But surrounding this ordered city is a wilderness, a border teeming with organic, unpredictable life. Vines sprout faces, rabbits duel with snails, and hybrid creatures contort themselves into impossible knots. This was not a design flaw or a messy intrusion. It was a deliberate philosophical statement. The page became a microcosm of the entire medieval universe. The text represented the divine law, the unwavering structure of creation. The margin, in all its chaotic glory, represented the untamed earth, the realm of human folly, nature's strangeness, and the sheer unpredictability of life. One was meaningless without the other. You could not have salvation without acknowledging the sin and chaos from which you were being saved. This aesthetic principle gave scribes and illuminators a profound license for creativity. The margin was a designated space for controlled chaos, a garden where the imagination was allowed to run wild precisely because it was contained by the border. This sanctioned freedom meant that even the most bizarre babewin was, in its own way, a part of God's creation, a reminder of the world's infinite variety. And sometimes this riot of visual creativity sought its own rhythm, spilling over from the page into the air as a silent, visual music. Sometimes the margin was not meant to be seen but heard. A quiet hum, a remembered melody, would rise in a scribe's mind, and his hand would translate that inner music into a few notes carefully sketched beside a psalm. This was not part of the official text, but a fleeting auditory glimpse into his world, a popular drinking song, a fragment of a liturgical chant, or perhaps a simple tune of his own making. Why commit music to the page in such an unofficial space? It could have been a practical memory aid, a way to mark a pause for a breath or a moment of reflection in the long copying process. For a moment, the silent scriptorium was filled with the ghost of a song, a personal soundscape preserved in ink. Other marks served an even clearer purpose for the mind. A scribe might draw a simple, schematic key next to a passage about Saint Peter receiving the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This was not a doodle of boredom, but a deliberate mnemonic device, a visual hook to ensure that particular theological concept was locked firmly into memory. The same mind that crafted complex riddles used these simple drawings as a filing system, organizing complex information through imagery. This reveals a crucial layer of marginalia often overlooked in favor of the more flamboyant jokes and beasts. The margin was the scribe's personal notebook, a multi-purpose space for intellectual housekeeping. It was a tool for learning, for recall, and for structuring thought itself. Here, the line between work and play completely dissolves. A grotesque face could be a moment of rebellion on one page, while on the next, a sketched hand pointing to a crucial line was pure, focused scholarship. This practical application shows the scribe's mind in its most diligent state, constantly processing, categorizing, and making the text his own. And just as his thoughts on faith and philosophy filled the margins, so too did the mundane details of the life he led outside the scriptorium walls. A farmer bent over his plow, carved in a few quick lines, tells us more about medieval agriculture than some written records. These are the margins that document, not just decorate. Amidst the fantastical beasts and satirical jokes, scribes often turned their quills to the world just outside the monastery window. They sketched the blacksmith at his forge, the rhythmic strike of his hammer frozen in ink. They drew women stirring pots over a hearth and children rolling a hoop in a dusty yard. These are not the polished, idealized scenes commissioned for a noblewoman's prayer book. They are spontaneous, sometimes clumsy observations. Their very crudeness is what makes them so valuable. They were drawn from life, not from an artist's manual. In these quick sketches, we see the actual tools a carpenter used: the cut of a commoner's tunic, the simple design of a wooden cart. A doodle of a cat pouncing on a mouse under a table is a moment of universal domestic chaos, a scene that would be just as at home in your own kitchen. This transforms Marginalia into an uncensored historical snapshot, a candid photo album of the Middle Ages. Formal chronicles recorded the deeds of kings and the dates of battles, but they largely ignored the daily rhythms that defined existence for 99% of the population. Here, in the margins, that silent majority finds its voice. We see their work, their leisure, their mundane struggles and small joys. This makes these doodles an indispensable resource for understanding the texture of everyday life, for hearing the quiet hum of history beneath the fanfare of great events. That same documenting impulse also turned inward, capturing the very process of how these remarkable books were made. The book itself had a life beyond the scribe who first gave it form. It traveled, changed hands, and gathered voices. The margins of a single manuscript could fill with notes from a dozen different readers, each leaving a trace of their own time and mind. A monk in the 12th century might carefully correct a misspelled word. 200 years later, a university scholar in a bustling town could add a complex Latin explanation in the top corner. Then, a noblewoman in the 16th century, wanting to stamp the book as her own, might proudly draw her family's coat of arms in a blank space. This layered history transforms the parchment into a kind of time capsule, a cumulative record of use and ownership. You are not just looking at one moment of creation, but at the entire life story of the book as an object passed from one careful hand to another across the centuries. Sometimes this interaction becomes a direct conversation. A reader encountering a bizarre doodle of a jousting snail left by a scribe 3 generations earlier might draw a tiny arrow pointing to it and write a single word in the local vernacular: ridiculous. Another might add a second snail to the scene, joining the absurd battle. This creates a multi-generational dialogue, a quiet collaboration between people who never met, all speaking through the same margins. The page becomes a communal space, a forum where the barrier of time seems to dissolve. For historians, these layers are a specialized field of study, a discipline of untangling the threads of different hands and inks to reconstruct the object's journey. Each new signature, each added gloss, and every coat of arms enriches the narrative, proving that a book was never truly finished, only waiting for its next reader to pick up the pen and continue the conversation. A faint brown smudge on ancient parchment might look like nothing more than a stain, yet to a scholar equipped with modern tools, that same smudge could be the ghost of a monk's private joke waiting to be resurrected. Decoding these whispers requires more than a magnifying glass. It demands a technological time machine. One of the most powerful of these tools is multispectral imaging. This process involves photographing a manuscript under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. What appears as a blank space to our eyes might suddenly reveal a detailed drawing or a line of text under infrared light, because the original ink, even when faded, often absorbs light differently than the parchment around it. It is like tuning a radio to a frequency once thought lost to static, suddenly hearing a clear voice from the past. Another revolutionary technique, X-ray fluorescence, acts as a chemical detective. By scanning a page, it can identify the unique elemental signature of the inks used. If a scribe used an iron gall ink with a specific trace of copper for his official text, but a different carbon-based ink for his personal doodle, the X-ray fluorescence can tell them apart. This helps scholars untangle the timeline of a page, determining which notes were added by the original scribe and which were inserted by a reader a century later. These are not just laboratory curiosities. High-resolution digital archives now put these rediscovered details on screens around the world, allowing a researcher in Tokyo to examine the brushstrokes of a marginal dragon in a Parisian library without risking the fragile original. This global collaboration has turned the study of Marginalia into a collective puzzle-solving endeavor. The work itself is a painstaking form of detective work. A scholar might spend weeks comparing the way a specific scribe drew a rabbit's ear across a dozen different manuscripts, building a profile of his unique artistic fingerprint. It is a process of connecting fragments where a single, recovered line can be the key that unlocks a scribe's identity or confirms a manuscript's journey from one monastery to another. This scientific approach does not replace traditional paleography, the art of reading old handwriting. It supercharges it. Technology gives us the keys to unlock these silent conversations. And as we recover more of these lost voices, we are forced to confront a new and pressing question. How do we ethically preserve these fragile, talking margins for the listeners of the future? A coffee stain from the 1600s is just as much a part of the book's story as the ink from the 1300s. This is the heart of a modern ethical battle being fought in conservation labs. When a 500-year-old manuscript arrives for treatment, the conservator faces a profound choice. Should they carefully remove the smudges, the later notes, the faded doodles added by readers over the centuries, all in an effort to restore the page to its original, pristine state? Or must every single mark, no matter how seemingly insignificant, be preserved as a vital layer in the object's unique biography? There is no simple answer. On one side of the debate are those who argue for the primacy of the original text. For them, a prayer book is defined by the sacred words the scribe was paid to copy. Everything else, from a student's messy calculations in the margin to a noble family's coat of arms stamped over a corner, is a form of historical vandalism. Cleaning the page, in this view, is an act of respect for the author's initial, pure intention. It is like carefully peeling away centuries of graffiti from an ancient monument to reveal the artist's true work beneath. The opposing view holds that a manuscript is not a static monument, but a living document. Its true value lies in its entire journey through time. That 17th century coffee stain tells us the book was read in a busy coffeehouse. The angry comment scribbled by a Reformation-era reader reveals how political turmoil changed how people interpreted the same text. Each edition is a conversation, and to erase the later voices is to silence that conversation. It would be like editing a long, fascinating letter to remove everything except the first paragraph. This debate forces us to ask what we are really trying to save. Are we preserving an idealized object, or are we preserving a complex, messy, and deeply human history? Modern conservation philosophy has largely come down on the side of the mess. The guiding principle is now minimal intervention. The goal is not to make the manuscript look new, but to stabilize its current condition, to halt decay without erasing the evidence of its long life. A conservator might painstakingly repair a tear in the parchment, but they would never scrub away the faint outline of a monk's doodle to do it. This respectful, cautious approach is a gift to the future. It ensures that the next generation of scholars, armed with even better technology, can discover layers of meaning we cannot even see today. The way we choose to treat these fragile whispers from the past is a mirror. It reflects our own values, our own definition of history, and our own humility in the face of a story that is still being told. That single coffee stain preserved by a modern conservator is a testament to a shared reality. The monk shivering in his scriptorium and the student doodling in a textbook today are connected by the same flicker of mental restlessness. Why does a 700-year-old rabbit jousting a snail feel so immediately familiar? In our world of digital perfection, where text appears uniformly on screens and errors are deleted without a trace, the medieval manuscript stands as a deeply human artifact. It is gloriously imperfect. You can see the tremor in a line, the hesitation in a curve, the ghost of a thought that was scratched out but never fully erased. This tangible evidence of a human hand at work creates a bridge of empathy that a flawless digital file cannot. We recognize our own instinct to personalize, to mark our territory on the impersonal. Writing a snarky comment in a rented textbook, sketching a cartoon on a sticky note, even leaving a cryptic note in a library book, these are all our modern marginalia. They are our small, quiet acts of asserting our presence in a world of standardized information. This connection does something remarkable to our perception of history. It shatters the marble statue and reveals the person. We are no longer looking at a distant, idealized past of saints and kings, but at the thoughts of ordinary individuals who got bored, who made inside jokes, and who found subtle ways to talk back to their world. It democratizes history, letting us eavesdrop on the conversations of the anonymous millions who built the world but rarely made it into the official chronicles. In an era of constant information overload, the act of focusing on one single doodle, one whispered complaint from the edge of a page, becomes a profound act of mindfulness. It is a direct, intimate connection to a single human mind across the vast chasm of centuries. Their struggle with monotony, their need for creative expression, and their quiet rebellion are not medieval quirks. They are human constants. The true, enduring power of the talking margin is this timelessness, the startling realization that the impulse to draw in the margins is a thread that connects every restless hand that has ever held a pen. A thumbs-up emoji does the same work today as a tiny pointing hand drawn in a manuscript margin 700 years ago. Our digital messages, often stark and toneless on their own, are brought to life with these small pictorial additions. We add a crying, laughing face to show we are joking, a skull to signal something is hilariously bad, or a fire emoji to mark a brilliant idea. These are not just decorations, they are essential punctuation for our emotional state, a non-verbal layer of meaning that prevents our words from being misunderstood. This is the direct descendant of the scribe's manicule, that drawn finger saying "look here," or his grotesque face expressing sheer exasperation at a difficult passage. The platforms have simply given us a standardized, clickable library of marginalia. When you react to a friend's post with a meme of a cat face palming, you are performing the same act of social commentary as a medieval scribe who drew a fox preaching to geese. You are using a shared visual language to express a complex feeling: disbelief, solidarity, mockery, that plain text struggles to convey. The blank space of a text box or a social media comment thread is our new parchment, and we feel the same deep-seated urge to fill its emptiness with a piece of ourselves. We are all modern scribes annotating the endless digital text of our daily lives. This instinct to personalize is so powerful that it has shaped the very tools we use. The annotation feature in a PDF reader, allowing a user to highlight a passage and add a sticky note with a question or a joke, is a direct technological acknowledgement of this ancient need. It formalizes the margin, making it a sanctioned space for conversation, just as the physical border of a medieval page did. Our digital world has not eliminated the desire to talk back to the text. It has simply given that desire infinite scroll and a global audience. The quiet chuckle of a monk spotting a snail duel in his colleague's work is now the public laugh of a retweet with a witty comment. The scale is different, but the core human impulse is unchanged, a testament to the fact that we have always needed more than just words to truly connect. The Gorleston Psalter is a universe bound in leather and vellum, a book where the margins have completely taken over. Created in early 14th century England, this prayer book's borders are not a quiet commentary but a roaring carnival. Over 1,000 individual scenes jostle for space in its margins, an overwhelming tide of life and satire that transforms every page into a spectacle. A fox dressed as a monk plays the bagpipes with manic enthusiasm. A rabbit standing on its hind legs solemnly rings a church bell. Hybrid monsters, part human and part bird, contort themselves into impossible knots. Alongside this fantasy unfolds the real world, captured in quick, vivid sketches of farmers plowing fields and blacksmiths hammering at anvils. The artistry here is not the furtive scratch of a bored scribe. Every line is confident, every wash of color deliberate. This breathtaking volume and quality tell a revolutionary story. The Marginalia in the Gorleston Psalter was not tolerated, it was commissioned. A wealthy patron paid for this riot of imagination, demanding that the edges of the sacred text be as magnificent and filled with stories as the Psalms themselves. To study its pages is to read a visual encyclopedia of the medieval mind. Here, faith coexists with folly, and the solemnity of prayer is underscored by the relentless energy of everyday existence. It represents the absolute pinnacle of the form, a place where the margins do not just talk. They sing a complex hymn, they dance a dizzying jig, and they tell 1,000 stories all at once. This Psalter is the ultimate testament to the creative explosion that could flourish when a society decided that the edges of the page were just as important as the center. Yet for every irreverent rabbit we discover, countless others have faded into dust. The sheer volume of what has been lost is staggering. Imagine the libraries consumed by fire, the manuscripts recycled for their precious parchment, the delicate pages that simply crumbled away in damp castle cellars. The marginalia that has survived, the very subject of our fascination, is almost certainly the exception, a tiny, random sampling of a once vast conversation. The voices we hear are the lucky ones, the whispers that happen to be written in a book that endured war, neglect, and the simple ravages of time. This random survival creates a profound distortion in our view of the past. We cannot know if the jokes we find were commonplace or if the most brilliant, subversive scribe of his age left no trace of his work behind. This inherent fragility means we are only ever reading a few scattered pages from a much longer, richer story. And even when we hold a surviving page in our hands or on our screens, a second, more subtle form of loss occurs. We are separated from the creator by an unbridgeable gap of centuries. We can analyze the ink, identify the animal in the parchment, and date the script with scientific precision, but we can never truly enter the scribe's mind. Was that particular sketch of a grimacing face a moment of pure, unthinking boredom, or was it a deliberate caricature of the monastery's irritable cook? The private joke that made the entire scriptorium laugh until their sides ached 700 years ago might now be nothing more than a puzzling, silent image. Our modern interpretations are always, to some degree, a projection. We layer our own understandings, our own cultural biases, and our own senses of humor onto these marks, trying to fill a silence that can never truly be filled. This is not a failure of scholarship, but a fundamental condition of studying the past. The mystery itself becomes part of the artifact's power. That unanswered question hanging in the margin invites us in. It demands that we become active participants, collaborators with a long-dead scribe in the endless project of making meaning. We look at his doodle and we are forced to wonder, to imagine the context, to supply the missing punchline. In this way, the silence surrounding some marks is as eloquent as the messages we can clearly read. It is a humbling reminder of the limits of historical recovery, a quiet testament to all the voices we can never hope to hear. The blank spaces of a medieval page were never truly silent. They were vibrant talking spaces, humming with the restless energy of the human hand. From the simple, instinctual doodle born of a weary wrist to the sophisticated riddle and the subversive satire, these marks form a secret language, one that reveals the scribe not as a passive copyist, but as an active, thinking and feeling individual. He was a commentator, a jester, and an artist, all within the confines of a single page. This discovery shatters the illusion of history as a single, monolithic narrative. It shows us that the past is not a grand statue carved from stone, but a rich tapestry woven from countless personal threads, each one a story of boredom, brilliance, frustration, and faith. To learn the language of these margins is to build a bridge across the centuries, a bridge made not of dates and battles, but of shared human experience. The next time your own hand drifts to the edge of a notebook, tracing a shape in the white space, remember that you are participating in an ancient and deeply human ritual. You are adding your own quiet voice to a conversation that has been running for over 1,000 years. Let these talking margins be your inspiration to find your own voice, to leave your own mark, no matter how small, in the constrained spaces of your own world. Thank you for joining this journey into the edges of history, where the smallest whispers often tell the grandest stories.